The river was quiet that morning, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl because it feels like something is watching. Travis Morrow had been fishing the same stretch of Willow Creek River for over 20 years, but he'd never seen anything like it. A Bible, old, bloated from water, its pages warped, bobbing gently against a rock, and wrapped around it a thick rusted chain and an iron lock, the kind you'd expect to see on a prison gate. It wasn't just a book. It was a message, and it had been waiting. At first, he didn't even want to touch it. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world anymore. But curiosity is louder than fear, and by the time the sun broke through the gray clouds above, Travis had the Bible in the back of his truck, still dripping. What he didn't know, not yet, was that the book would unlock a story the town of Bellwood had buried for 35 years. A story of faith, silence, and what really happened to the two nuns who vanished during the storm of '76. It had started as a whisper. Just rain tapping on the rooftop of St. Iona's convent like a child asking to be let in. By nightfall, it was a storm. Thunder cracked open the sky like God himself was furious, and the rain didn't fall. It slammed. The convent's power went out just after midnight. When it returned 3 hours later, Sister Marian DeVoe and Sister Catherine Bell were gone. No one had seen them leave. No one had heard them scream. Their beds were undisturbed, their personal effects untouched. The only clue was a muddy trail of footprints leading from the back door into the woods, and a broken rosary half buried in the soil. The town of Bellwood had tried to explain it away. They got caught in the flood, some said. They ran away, others whispered. But the truth was, no one knew. And worse, no one seemed to want to. Father Roan Ellis, the priest at St. Iona's, had led the search parties back then. Dozens of volunteers had combed through the woods, the riverbanks, even the abandoned mines outside town. But nothing, not even a scrap of cloth, was ever found. Eventually, people moved on. Time does that. It dulls things. The storm became folklore. The nuns became cautionary tales told to children. And the river, it kept flowing, like it hadn't swallowed 2 lives whole. But when Travis Morrow handed the locked Bible to the sheriff's department, something changed. The book was dried and examined by preservationists at the county archives. On the spine, just faint enough to be missed at first glance, were 2 initials, M.D. Marian DeVoe. It was impossible. The convent Bible had been logged and stored away since 1977. This was a different one, older. Handwritten notes were found in the margins, some theological, others strange. One note, scrawled in faded black ink, read, "I will not be silent. If my voice is taken, let the river speak." That's when they called in Eliza Quinn, a historical archivist from Baton Rouge who specialized in religious artifacts. She was young, sharp, and, unlike most of Bellwood, wasn't afraid of stirring the past. "I've seen chained Bibles before," she explained to the sheriff, "in monasteries, in prisons. Even some that were locked to pulpits so they couldn't be removed. But never like this. Never sealed like a secret." She studied the handwriting, the notations, the ink patterns. "This was written in captivity," she said finally. "Whoever wrote these notes was trapped. And that was the moment the town could no longer pretend the past had stayed buried." Eliza didn't grow up in Bellwood, which meant she wasn't weighed down by its silence. She didn't know that back in 1976, the storm hadn't just knocked out power, it had knocked out trust. Rumors had spread that the convent had secrets, that a visiting priest had disappeared around the same time as the nuns, that someone had heard screaming from the old root cellar beneath the chapel. But those rumors had never made it into any official report. Because in Bellwood, you didn't question the church, and you sure as hell didn't question Father Roan Ellis. Now, in his 80s, the retired priest lived in a care home on the edge of town. He rarely spoke, especially not about the past. But when Eliza asked to see him, he agreed. She arrived with the Bible in hand, the lock removed, its swollen pages gently wrapped in muslin. The moment she placed it on the table in front of him, something changed in the old man's eyes. "I thought it was gone," he whispered. "What is it?" Eliza asked, leaning forward. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the book like it was breathing. "Did you know them?" she pressed. "Marian and Catherine?" "Marian was," he faltered. "She was light. She had questions. Too many for the church's liking. And Catherine, she followed Marian wherever she went. Eliza hesitated, then asked the question no one had dared in decades. What really happened to them? Father Roan looked away, out the window, toward the river that twisted like a scar across the land. I prayed they drowned, he said, because the truth was worse. Eliza sat frozen. The priest's words echoed through the sterile air of the care home like a confession no one had asked for. I prayed they drowned, because the truth was worse. She leaned in, heart thudding. What do you mean worse? Father Roan Ellis didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on something far away. Not outside the window, but inside his memory. There are sins worse than death, Miss Quinn, especially when committed in the name of God. Eliza opened the Bible again, gently flipping through the warped pages. Dozens of handwritten notes lined the margins, some scripture, others diary-like entries. One was dated July 3rd, 1976, the day before the nuns vanished. They warned me to stop asking, said obedience is holiness, but silence is not purity. It is fear. If I disappear, tell them it was not God who called me away. Eliza tapped the entry with her pen. Did you know someone was writing this? These notes? These warnings? Father Roan's face tightened. I knew Marion was. Troubled. No, Eliza said softly but firmly. She wasn't troubled. She was terrified. Later that evening, Eliza returned to her rented apartment above the old hardware store in Bellwood's town square. Rain was falling again. Not a storm, but a steady, sorrowful drizzle that felt like memory seeping from the sky. She spread the Bible out across her desk under an archival lamp. Every page was cataloged, numbered, preserved, and on a hunch she flipped to the book of Psalms, where people often left personal notes. There it was, a small triangular fold in the corner of Psalm 69. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. Eliza stared at the verse, not underlined, not highlighted, but folded, marked. Her breath caught when she saw it, tucked barely beneath the crease, a single water-damaged photograph. Two women wearing the habits of nuns. One smiled gently, the other stared directly at the camera, her gaze sharp, urgent, and very much alive. Scrawled on the back in faded ink, if this reaches you, follow the water. The next morning, Eliza went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Nolan Gaines was a fourth-generation Bellwood native, weathered, polite, but not one for poking old wounds. At first, he brushed her off. Miss Quinn, this is 35-year-old business. Storm came, river flooded. Lot of things get lost in water. Things don't float back 3 decades later wrapped in a chain and holding secrets, Eliza snapped, placing the Bible and the photograph on his desk. This wasn't just lost. It was hidden. Gaines sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You're not from here. You don't understand how many people that storm hurt. How many moved on? Because they had to. And how many never got to move on because no one let them, she replied. This photo was hidden in that Bible, locked away, with instructions to follow the water. The sheriff hesitated. Follow it where? That's what I'm trying to find out. Back in 1976, the convent had backed up to a dense forest with a winding tributary that led from the river to a secluded glade, a place the nuns used for prayer and solitude. It had long since grown over, forgotten. But the photo gave Eliza a clue. The background showed a decaying footbridge, and she found it still listed on a 1975 topographic survey filed with the county. With reluctant permission from the sheriff, Eliza set out to find the location. The path was barely visible, overtaken by thorny underbrush and time. After nearly an hour of hiking through damp, tangled woods, she found it. The footbridge was half collapsed, weathered gray, and choked with ivy. But beneath it, the tributary still whispered, the water slow and dark. And just beyond the far side of the bridge, buried in moss and vines, stood the chapel of St. Lilith, a place no one had spoken of in years. The door was nailed shut. Eliza circled the chapel, heart pounding. It was small, a single-room structure with stained glass windows long since shattered. A tarnished iron bell hung from its wooden steeple, silent as the grave. Behind the chapel was a stone well, sealed with a rotted wooden cover. Eliza leaned over it carefully and immediately recoiled. A bitter, chemical stench rose from within. Not decay, preservation. She pulled out her phone and called Sheriff Gaines. Sheriff, I need you to come out here. What did you find? I don't know yet, Eliza said, but I think someone made sure we never would. By the time the sheriff arrived with 2 deputies, dusk had begun to settle. Shadows stretched long across the clearing, and the wind had picked up again. The kind of wind that whispers through trees like they're holding secrets. They pried open the chapel doors. Inside, dust blanketed everything. Cobwebs hung like curtains from the ceiling beams. But at the front, where the altar once stood, there was a trap door, bolted shut. Eliza's voice was barely audible. This wasn't on any of the building plans. Sheriff Gaines nodded grimly. Let's open it. The bolt came loose with a sharp snap. The door groaned open. A rush of air, cold, metallic, and ancient, spilled upward from the dark below. Flashlights were raised and stairs were descended. The stairs creaked under each step, the sound swallowed by the darkness below. Sheriff Gaines went first, his flashlight beam cutting through the dust-filled air. Eliza followed, her breath shallow, every sense alert. The deputies descended behind them, quiet, weapons holstered but ready. The space beneath the chapel was nothing like anyone expected. It wasn't a cellar, it was a chamber. Stone walls, low ceiling, and strange symbols carved into the limestone. In the far corner, a metal-framed cot sat untouched for decades. Its mattress rotted away. Chains were bolted into the wall beside it. Eliza swallowed hard. This was a holding cell. Sheriff Gaines moved carefully toward a small wooden table near the center of the room. On it sat a lantern, oil long gone, and a small leather-bound book. It wasn't the Bible Eliza had found. This one was smaller, simpler, a journal. She flipped it open with gloved hands. The first page bore only 2 lines in slanted cursive. If you're reading this, it means the river carried my voice further than the church ever would. My name is Sister Marion DeVoe. The entries were brief but brutal. July 4th, 1976. They came for us in the storm. Said we were traitors to the faith. Said we had spoken too much. Asked too many questions. July 7th. Catherine fought them. I told her not to. She wouldn't stop. I think they hurt her worse because of it. July 12th. They brought us down here to be purified. The church cannot tolerate doubt. The river has been my only friend. I pray someone will listen to her someday. The room went silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Eliza flipped to the final entry. If only one of us survives, let it be the truth. She closed the journal and looked to the sheriff. This wasn't a random disappearance. This was punishment. Someone in that convent, or above it, decided to erase them. Deputy Simmons called out from across the room, "Sheriff, you're going to want to see this." In the wall behind the cot, partially hidden behind an old tapestry, was a doorway, more like a crawl space. The deputies cleared the area, and with a flashlight in hand, Eliza ducked into the passage. It was narrow, damp. The air stank of mildew and old oil. But then the space opened into a tiny alcove, and there, huddled against the far wall, were bones. Wrapped in a decayed habit, rosary clutched in skeletal fingers, and beside the remains carved in large letters into the stone wall, "She kept the faith." Eliza gasped, stepping back. "Catherine!" Sheriff Gaines muttered a prayer under his breath. This wasn't just a place of secrecy. It was a tomb, a hidden grave beneath a forgotten chapel buried under decades of silence. And someone still alive, had made sure it stayed that way. Back at the surface, dusk had melted into night. The woods around the chapel buzzed with the hum of insects and the faint rustling of leaves. Gaines called the coroner and a forensics team. Eliza sat on the stone steps, the Bible beside her, the journal still open in her lap. She wrote as long as she could, she whispered. She documented everything. The sheriff crouched beside her, and someone chained her words shut, hoping no one would ever read them. Eliza nodded slowly. It was deliberate, strategic, and they nearly got away with it. But they didn't, the sheriff replied, because the river didn't forget. The next morning, the town was buzzing. Word spread quickly in Bellwood. Even things folks tried to suppress. The chapel was sealed off. The sheriff issued a public statement confirming the discovery of human remains and historical documents linked to the 1976 case. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling faster than anyone could control. The Diocese of Baton Rouge sent a representative, Monsignor Daniel Farrell, to oversee the investigation and protect church interests. He arrived with legal counsel and a rehearsed calm. "We appreciate the work being done," he said to the sheriff, "but we ask that you refrain from drawing conclusions before proper ecclesiastical review." Eliza met his eyes, sharp and cold. "2 women were buried alive under your chapel, Monsignor. What part of that requires review? He smiled politely. And I'm sure we all want the full truth. In God's time. But God's time, Eliza thought, was already here, and it was angry. That evening, Eliza returned to the care home. She needed to speak to Father Roan Ellis again, but when she arrived, his room was empty. "Where is he?" she asked the nurse. "He checked himself out this morning," the woman replied. "Left a note at the front desk." Eliza's blood ran cold. She asked to see the note. It was scrawled in shaky handwriting, barely legible. "There are more than two. I wasn't the only one who knew. They're still watching. Please forgive me." No signature, no destination, just silence. Eliza paced the sheriff's office, her mind racing. The note from Father Roan wasn't a goodbye. It was a warning. There are more than two. More victims, more secrets, or more people involved. Sheriff Gaines hung up the phone, jaw tight. "State police are reviewing the chapel site now. The remains are confirmed female, approximate age matching Sister Catherine Bell. Forensics say the death was consistent with long-term confinement and exposure. They're calling it probable homicide." Eliza nodded grimly. Then Marion's journal wasn't exaggerating. She was telling the truth. "She always was," the sheriff said. "The system just didn't want to hear it." But the question remained, what did Roan mean by more than two? While waiting for state authorities to formally reopen the 1976 case, Eliza combed through archived convent blueprints, personal letters, and diocesan transfer records. One name kept surfacing in connection with Sister Marion, a nun named Sister Aurelia Blake. She wasn't listed as missing, dead, or transferred. In fact, after 1976, she simply disappeared from the record altogether. No forwarding address, no obituary, no retirement. Eliza brought this to Sheriff Gaines. "Could she be one of the more than two?" "Let's find out," he said, grabbing his keys. "We're going to the convent." St. Iona's had been vacant for over a decade, its red brick facade weathered but still imposing. The sheriff used a master key issued back when the building was decommissioned. The inside was a time capsule. Dust-covered pews, faded hymnals, and forgotten relics lined the walls. Eliza led the way through the eastern corridor toward the dormitory rooms once used by the nuns. In the back corner, one door bore the initials A.B., Sister Aurelia Blake. It was locked. With a nod from the sheriff, Deputy Simmons pried it open. Inside, the room was oddly intact. A simple bed, desk, and crucifix remained, as if waiting. But it was what lay inside the desk drawer that froze Eliza in place. A folded letter, unopened, yellowed with age, addressed to Marion DeVoe, to be opened in event of my disappearance. Eliza carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The letter, written in delicate cursive, read, "Marion, if they silence me, know this. The truth lies beneath the orchard. Our Blessed Mother watches over it still. Tell Catherine not to be afraid. Tell her God is with us, even here." The bottom was signed, Aurelia. Sheriff Gaines looked at Eliza. "What orchard?" "There was one," she said, pulling out a 1970 survey map. "North side of the convent property. They tore it out in the early 80s to expand the cemetery." The sheriff grabbed his radio. "Simmons, grab some shovels." That afternoon, under a cloudy sky threatening rain, they arrived at the far end of the cemetery. Rows of graves stretched in orderly silence. But beyond them, near the fence line, was a patch of land where no markers stood. Just grass, uneven and disturbed over time. The Blessed Mother watched from a weather-worn statue near the hedge line. Her face cracked, her hands clasped in prayer. The deputies began to dig. It didn't take long. Less than 2 feet down, the spade struck something solid. A wooden box, small, nailed shut. They pried it open. Inside, wrapped in canvas, were documents. Names, ledgers, a list. Eliza's heart stopped. "These are transfer orders, financial records, disciplinary logs." Gaines squinted at a page. This is a record of church payouts to families of former convent members. Some are listed as reassignments, others as deceased, but they were paid, all within the same month in 1976. Eliza found another journal, thinner, bound in red leather. She opened it carefully. Inside was a list of 6 names. 2 of them were Marion DeVoe and Catherine Bell. Another, Aurelia Blake. 3 others were unfamiliar. "She said there were more than 2, Eliza whispered. "There were 6. That night, storm clouds gathered again over Bellwood, as if history were circling back. Rain began to fall in slow, heavy drops. Eliza stood on the convent balcony, looking out over the orchard-turned graveyard. The ledger pages clutched in her hands trembled in the wind. "How many of them never made it into the ground with a name?" she whispered. Sheriff Gaines joined her. "State police are requesting full access to the diocese archives. They're not calling it a cold case anymore." "What are they calling it?" "An active cover-up spanning 4 decades. Eliza stared at the sky. "And we only found it because a Bible refused to stay buried." Meanwhile, 60 miles away in a retirement villa funded by the church, a man watched the evening news flash images of St. Iona's. He recognized the chapel, the well, the footbridge. He turned off the TV, stood, and opened a drawer. Inside was a pendant, a silver cross engraved with the letters AB. He placed it into a box, locked it, and walked slowly to his car. The storm was coming, and he had one more confession to make. The rain came down harder the next morning, steady and cold. In the sheriff's office, files were spread across the conference table, yellow documents, black and white photos, transfer orders, bank records, and now 6 names. 6 women. 2 confirmed dead, 1 missing but presumed buried, 3 others still unaccounted for. Sheriff Gaines looked over the growing evidence. "We have enough to open formal investigations into wrongful death and institutional abuse." "And the diocese?" Eliza asked. "Very sure. They're already lawyering up." She looked down at the locked Bible, now resting in a clear archival box. It felt like an artifact from another world, one that still hadn't made peace with this one. That afternoon, the man who had watched the news in silence arrived at the sheriff's office. He introduced himself as Thomas Elbridge, age 82, former groundskeeper of St. Iona's. He had never spoken to police before, never told anyone what he saw. But when the Bible floated down the river, he said, "I knew the Lord wasn't finished." Gaines ushered him into a private room. Eliza sat in on the interview. Thomas was frail but clear. His voice shook more from guilt than age. "I heard them," he said. "The night of the storm. The girls, they were screaming." "Why didn't you say anything?" Eliza asked gently. "I was told to stay out of it. Told by Father Whitaker himself, the head of the order at the time. Said they were undergoing spiritual cleansing. That one had spread lies and the others followed." He looked down at his hands. "I brought them food once. Slipped it through the trap door under the chapel. Sister Marian took it. She said, 'God bless you. You're the only light left.'" "Did you see Sister Aurelia Blake?" Eliza asked. He nodded. "Last time I saw her, she was praying. Said she had buried something in the orchard. Said one day the church would have to answer." "And the others?" the sheriff asked. "The other 3? They weren't all nuns. One was a postulant. Another was a cook. All women, all silenced." By that evening, the entire town was talking. News crews lined up outside the sealed convent gates, candlelight vigils formed by the river. Survivors of other church-run institutions across the state came forward with stories of disappearances, threats, and payoffs. But amid the media frenzy, Eliza remained focused. She returned one last time to the riverbank, where the locked Bible had first been found. She sat on the cold stone, holding the red leather journal in her lap. The wind whispered through the trees like voices long gone. She flipped to the final page. There, in Marian's neat, cramped handwriting, were the last words she ever wrote. "If water can remember, so can we. Let the river carry our truth." 2 weeks later, forensic archaeologists returned to the convent site. With Eliza's help, they identified 3 additional hidden graves beneath what had once been the orchard's outer fence line. Bone fragments, rosaries, fabric fibers, all matching the convent's uniform style from the 1970s. Sister Aurelia Blake was among them. Her body was found with a wooden cross still gripped in her skeletal hand. Beneath her, buried in a sealed clay jar, were more letters addressed to the bishop, the diocese, even to Marian's family. None had ever been mailed. Eliza stood beside the excavation site, hands clasped, eyes closed. "This is what you meant, isn't it?" she whispered. "You weren't asking to be saved. You were asking to be heard." Months later, the diocese issued a formal statement acknowledging the deaths of all 6 women and announced a multi-million-dollar reparations fund. Criminal proceedings were launched against 2 retired clergy members who had signed falsified transfer orders in 1976. The cover-up had reached high, but now it was unraveling. A memorial was erected on the convent grounds, a marble plaque bearing 6 names, including Marian DeVoe and Catherine Bell. At its center, a stone carving of an open Bible, pages unfurled as if caught in wind or water. At the dedication ceremony, Eliza was asked to speak. She stepped up to the podium, voice steady but raw. They tried to erase these women. They called them rebels, heretics, troublemakers. But all they did was ask questions. All they did was believe. She paused, then added, "Let this be a place where silence is never again confused with peace." Later that day, as the crowd dispersed and cameras shut off, Eliza walked down to the river one last time. The rain had stopped. The water ran clear. She took out Marion's journal, now carefully preserved in a sealed case, and placed it on the memorial steps. Behind her, Sheriff Gaines joined her in silence. "Feels like she got the last word," he said. "She did," Eliza replied, "and she didn't need to speak it. The river said it for her." Far downstream, miles from Bellwood, a child skipping stones along the muddy bank paused. Something glinted in the water. It was small, silver. She reached down and pulled it out. A chain, thin, rusted, and attached to it a pendant, shaped like a cross. Engraved on the back, nearly worn smooth, was a single word. "Aurelia." The girl blinked, then called out to her mother, holding the cross up to the sky. Some stories don't end, they flow. And when the world forgets, the river remembers.